If you believe the adverts, it seems like airlines really care about their impact on the environment, want to reduce their carbon footprints and fly more sustainably. But often behind these adverts is little more than empty words. My name's Helen Coffey and I'm the travel editor of The Independent. If, like me, you're an avid traveller, but you also care about the climate crisis, you might have become aware of a growing trend for airlines and the aviation industry in general to shout about their eco-credentials. All these companies seem to be offering to get you to your destination on lower emissions at a lower price, to offer the cheapest, most sustainable flights in the sky. But if the prospect of affordable air travel that's also green sounds too good to be true, it's probably because it is. Here's how the aviation industry greenwashed the skies. Back in 2020, Ryanair had one of its adverts banned by the UK advertising watchdog. The ad in question claimed it had the lowest carbon emissions of any major airline and said it was Europe's lowest fares, lowest emissions airline. The claims were made based on CO2 emissions per passenger per kilometre flown, because the Irish aviation giant said it had the youngest fleet of aircraft, the highest proportion of seats filled, and the newest, most fuel-efficient engines. The ad was banned on a technicality. One of the charts Ryanair presented to the Advertising Standards Authority was based on data from 2011, while some major airlines weren't even included in its research for comparison. But it raised bigger questions about airlines' claims to be sustainable. The previous year, Ryanair was named in an EU report as one of Europe's top 10 polluting companies when it came to carbon emissions. The other 9 were all coal plants. Isn't it a bit of an oxymoron then for it to claim to be greener than its rivals? Isn't it a bit of an oxymoron for any airline to claim to be sustainable? Ryanair is far from being the only offender. In summer 2022, environmentalists launched the first ever lawsuit of its kind against an airline over accusations of greenwashing. A group of Dutch campaigners announced they were suing the Netherlands flag carrier, KLM, over an ad campaign they alleged breached European consumer law by misleading the public over how sustainable its flights were. The airline's Fly Responsibly adverts, urging customers to help pioneer a sustainable future, gave the false impression its flights would not exacerbate the climate crisis, the lawsuit claimed. Headed up by non-profit group Fossil Free and supported by environmental groups including Client Earth and Greenpeace, the case was heard by a Dutch court in April 2023. Where a lawyer argued that the only way to fly sustainably is not to fly, or to fly less. Anything KLM says differently is misleading consumers. The campaigners are demanding that KLM issue a correction and pull the plug on all similar adverts. KLM insists that it follows all advertising rules and argues that an existing industry panel should handle such complaints. And the legal action doesn't end there. In the US, a passenger filed a class action lawsuit this year against Delta Airlines over its sustainability claims. In 2020, the carrier announced it was going to become the world's first carbon-neutral airline. In reality, this meant it was buying up carbon offsets, which environmentalists believe to be extremely problematic for a whole variety of reasons. Now, a California resident says she's acting on behalf of anyone in the state who flew with Delta from March 2020, as she believes they were misled by the airline. Her attorneys have said that she booked with Delta and even paid more for her tickets due to her belief that by flying Delta, she engaged in more ecologically conscious air travel. It feels like this could just be the beginning. In the years and decades to come, we may well see more and more airlines being taken to court over their claims to be green, when in fact, aviation is responsible for around 2 to 3% of all carbon emissions worldwide, around 1 billion tonnes of CO2 per year, and contribute more to human-induced global warming than most countries, including Germany, according to a recent study in the journal Environmental Research Letters. As well as CO2, planes emit other chemicals that ramp up the warming effect when fuel is burnt at altitude. All in all, there's a good reason why environmental activists and campaigners take issue with any airline that claims to be sustainable. But those in power can be just as guilty of greenwashing. The UK government has repeatedly come under fire for its air travel strategy entitled Jet Zero. in which it claims that Brits will be able to enjoy guilt-free flying based on tech that's being developed around electric and hydrogen-powered planes and sustainable aviation fuels. The problem is, all of these have substantial obstacles in terms of cost, scalability and infrastructure that will prevent them from becoming mainstream in the short to medium term. Meanwhile, the number of flights powered by kerosene, the name for aviation fuel, continues to grow uninhibited now that the pandemic travel restrictions have lifted. There's also very little incentive for the airlines themselves to invest heavily in alternatives. Kerosene isn't taxed, there's no VAT on plane tickets, and very few governments are stepping in to impose any kinds of caps or limitations on flights. However, some pioneering legislation is starting to be introduced. For example, in May 2023, France passed a law banning domestic flights that can be replaced by a train journey of 2.5 hours or less. But some people have called it just a symbolic ban due to a number of caveats that go along with the new rules. All of the competing and often evidently nonsense sustainability claims have inevitably had an impact on consumer confidence when it comes to trusting travel brands. According to research, 2 out of 3 UK adults believe travel companies are guilty of greenwashing or making exaggerated sustainability claims. The report concluded that consumers have become more sceptical and are increasingly aware of greenwashing, while 1/3 said that environmental concerns mean I avoid flying. And if, like me, you're increasingly concerned about the climate emergency, that really is the simplest way of tackling the thorny issue of greenwashing, by simply avoiding air travel altogether where possible, and swapping planes for trains, ferries, buses, bikes, and your own 2 legs. I stopped flying for the climate back in 2019, and my travel since then has been full of far more adventure and excitement than it ever was back when I was a frequent flyer. Alternatively, when you do have to fly, consider buying carbon offsets, but always do your own research and prioritise carbon removal over carbon reduction projects. And never go for the ones offered by the airline. After all, can you ever really trust the person making the mess in the first place to clean it up properly?